Welcome to Sound of Resistance channel. The fire of war in Ukraine is not extinguished. Ukraine continues to witness violent conflicts since February. The most active region of Ukraine at the moment is the southern parts of the country. Kherson is on fire, so to speak. The conflict that has been going on for months in Kherson, one of the strategically important regions of Ukraine, has now left its place to silence. By attacking the Russian fronts, the Ukrainian army repeatedly tried to push the Russian soldiers out of the area. The Russian government resisted for Kherson to the end. The Russian government first carried out an evacuation operation for the safety of the residents. Russian commanders led the inhabitants of the region who were sent from Kherson to be sent to safe areas. An unexpected development took place in Kherson recently. Many Russian officers of the Russian army who served in Kherson announced their resignation. It was noteworthy that the Russian commanders led the evacuation process of the residents of Kherson, especially. The Russian army was shocked by the resignation of the officers. The resignations in the Russian army, where chaos and uprisings were not missing, would cause a loss of power. With the departure of the Russian commanders from the army, a major leadership problem also emerged in the Kherson region. While the Russian soldiers' stray, undisciplined attitudes are in the news every day, the lack of leadership in the region will trigger this situation even more. The resignation of Russian commanders was not the only problem in Kherson. The Russian army complains of being cornered by the Ukrainian army in Kherson. All avenues of aid provided to the Russian army were rendered unusable by the Ukrainian army. The Russian army is in a difficult situation in Kherson. Russian soldiers have been complaining that no aid has reached the region for weeks. The Ukrainian army dealt a major blow to Russia's logistic network. Russia could not ignore the troubles in Kherson. The general at the head of the Russian army recently announced that he has decided to withdraw Russian soldiers from Kherson. This radical decision taken by the Russian general fell on the agenda like a bomb. There are many comments that Russian leader Putin's leaving the region he annexed and withdrawing Russian soldiers from the region will damage his reputation. A Putin supporter group said that the decision to push back the Russian soldiers in Kherson was made on the spot and on time. After Putin's developments in Kherson, he was declared an enemy in the Kremlin. Kremlin elites criticized the Russian leader with heavy accusations. The Kremlin announced that the Russian leader should not occupy more seats. The throne of the Russian leader is shaken. It remains to be seen how Putin will deal with such opposing views. In addition, the Russian leader received a great response from his supporters. Ultra-nationalist Alexander Dugin, known as Putin's brain, in a social media post, accused the Russian president of surrendering the city on November 12th, describing him as an autocrat with ultimate power over the war. Alexander Dugin said the retreat undermined Russian ideology by failing to defend Russian cities. Russian state television presenter Vladimir Soloviev, nicknamed Putin's voice for his support for the president, expressed his disappointment that Moscow forces blew up bridges as they retreated from Kherson. The withdrawal of the Russian army in Kherson was met with mildness in the first minutes. It was alleged that Russia was withdrawing its troops from parts of Ukraine as a goodwill gesture. But soon, there was a growing backlash, and it was argued that the Russian army should have attacked Ukrainian infrastructure earlier, while discussing reports of troops blowing up bridges over the Dnipro River as they retreated. Since February, I have been shouting loudly that we need to tear down bridges, destroy infrastructure, destroy entryways, the host said. Addressing the Russian army, Dugin said, "You do not understand anything. They will bring Ukrainian army equipment." It seems that Russia will not be able to get over the impact of the military withdrawal in Kherson for a while. The Ukrainian army, on the other hand, continues to attack the areas occupied by the Russians. According to Kyiv officials, Russia lost 10,000 troops in 2 weeks while Ukraine continued its counterattack. Having failed to capitalize on the success Russian forces had in the opening phase of the war, Russian President Vladimir Putin is now liberating their lands, including the strategically important city of Kherson. The Ukrainian army cleared many regions of Russian soldiers with its successful attacks. There are claims by the Ukrainian military that the areas liberated from Russian occupation are as much as 50% of the country. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine said that Russia lost 10,000 soldiers in a little over 2 weeks. And the overall figure is now 80,860. Since its last daily update, Ukrainian officials said another 650 people had been killed. The General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces said in a statement that 1,837 Russian artillery systems, along with 278 aircraft and 261 helicopters, were captured or destroyed in the past 24 hours. Their statement came after Ukrainian officials announced on February 24th that 70,000 Russians had been killed since the start of the war. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky previously said Russia could reach 100,000 deaths during the war, but added that this would not change the Kremlin's mind or approach to the conflict. Russia rarely discloses casualty and death figures, and most recently, it said several thousand people died. Both his estimates and that of Ukraine were questioned and rejected by war analysts. Moscow, on the other hand, stated it found the Russian soldier death data announced by the Ukrainian authorities to be untrue, and denied it. President of Ukraine Zelensky, who remained silent after Moscow ordered the forces to withdraw from the city of Kherson in southern Ukraine, made a statement. Zelensky and other Ukrainian officials urged caution and added that they doubt Russia's intention to withdraw. Earlier this week, Zelensky said, "We have to rein in our feelings for Kherson. Russia does not bring us gifts. That's why we act carefully in Kherson, without our emotions, without unnecessary risks." Kherson had been the first major territory to fall to Russia at the start of the war, and was the most viable success of his campaign due to its strategic location and proximity to the annexed Crimea. The peninsula lies behind the Ukrainian army's desire to reclaim Kherson from the Russian invaders. Crimea, which was annexed by Russia in 2014, has turned into a struggle of honor for Ukraine. From time to time, the Ukrainian army is attempting attacks to liberate Crimea from Russian invaders. The attack by the Ukrainian army on the Kirk Bridge on the Crimean Road last month made a big splash. Kirk Bridge is a very important position for Russia. The Russian army carries out most of its aid in Ukraine through this bridge. The attack of the Ukrainian army on the Kirk Bridge caused fear and panic in Russia. Russian President Putin was so enraged by the Ukrainian attack in Crimea that he launched missile attacks on Ukraine's urban centers in retaliation hours after the attack. We can understand the importance of Crimea for Russia from Putin's reckless attacks on Ukrainian urban centers. If the Ukrainian army succeeds in dominating the entire Kherson region, it will also open the door to Crimea. It must be quite exciting for the Ukrainians and for him that the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, is so close to the land he dreams of. The Ukrainian army did not for a moment give up their belief in their freedom after the Russian invaders entered their country in February. Ukraine, the army, and the people together, as a body, managed to stand upright against the Russian army. Together, they became a bulwark against the attacks of the Russian army. The Ukrainians began to reap the rewards of their heroic struggles. Thank you for watching us.